Hi all, this is Wonton, and welcome to my quick start guide for Sub Rogue in the Tomb of Sargeras. Sub Rogue is currently one of the strongest DPS specs in the game, possibly the strongest depending on where you look. It has great single target, AoE, cleave, target swapping, burst, survivability, pretty much everything, and it does all of those things as good or better than Assassination, despite being, in my opinion, actually simpler to play. The information in this guide is all backed up by simulations, logs, research, as well as my own personal experience playing Sub Rogue in a Mythic Raiding Guild. Let's get started. The talents you'll want to start with are Master of Subtlety, Night Stalker, Deeper Stratagem, whatever you want in the Survivability tier, whatever you want in the Crowd Control tier, Dark Shadow, and Death from Above. This setup allows for really high burst damage and is currently the strongest build in raiding and probably the strongest one in dungeons, making it a very good starting place. Let's start by talking about your resources. The key to playing Subtlety and any rogue spec properly is managing your two resources, energy and combo points. Energy has a base maximum of 100, mine's 105 because I'm a gnome, recharges passively over time, and is sometimes generated by passives and abilities. Pretty much all of your rotational abilities have an energy cost. Some of those abilities also generate combo points, which have a maximum of 5 by default. For us it's 6 because we took the Deeper Stratagem talent, and they're spent on hard-hitting finishers, mainly Nightblade and Eviscerate. For reasons of efficiency, the goal of basically every rogue rotation ever is to use builders to build combo points to max without wasting any, and then use a finisher to consume your combo points, all without wasting any energy either. Let's take a look at some of those combo point generators. Backstab is your basic generator. 1 combo point for 35 energy. Use this when nothing else is available. Shadow Strike is an improved generator. It generates 2 combo points for 40 energy, but only works during Stealth or Shadow Dance. Use this when it's available. Shuriken Storm is an AoE generator. It generates 1 combo point per target hit for 35 energy, and buffs your next Eviscerate. Use this on 2+ targets or on 3+ targets during Stealth or Shadow Dance. Now let's look at how to spend your combo points. First we have Nightblade. It's a dot that also buffs your damage against the target by 15%. Keep this up on your main target, the boss or a high health priority ad, in a trash pack. You can refresh this at less than 4.8 seconds with 5 combo points or at less than 5.4 seconds with 6 combo points. Eviscerate. This is your main spender. It's your hardest hitting ability, and where about 40% of your damage comes from. Dump these into your main target at 5 or 6 combo points. Also keep in mind that Shadow Techniques is a passive that'll sometimes give you a combo point from auto attacks. This will happen every 3, 4, or 5 auto attacks. With the Fortune's Bite artifact trait, it'll even generate a second combo point sometimes. Try to set at max combo points for no more than 1 global cooldown to avoid wasting combo points from this passive. In other words, as soon as you build your 6th combo point, use a finisher, and if you're not ready to use a finisher yet, you shouldn't have built that 6th combo point. Also, Relentless Strikes is a passive that'll generate energy every time you use a finisher. At 6 combo points, this will generate 36 energy, which is actually more than any of your finishers cost, so keep that in mind. I typically use finishers at no more than 80 energy or so I don't waste anything. So that's the basics. 3 combo point builders and 2 spenders, but of course, it's not really that simple, because Sub Rogues also have 5 to 6 offensive cooldowns, and using these properly is the key to most of your damage. You have Shadow Blades, Gormaw's Bite, Shadow Dance, Symbols of Death, Death from Above, and Vanish. These 3 cooldowns are the important ones, and should always be used together in a sort of combo. If you have the Legendary Shoulders, you can also add Vanish into this combo when it's available. To do the combo, first, make sure that Nightblade is refreshed with more than 10 seconds remaining. Build 5 to 6 combo points, and ideally, get the Finality Eviscerate buff if you can. Next, use Vanish if available and you have the shoulders, then Symbols, Death from Above, all in one GCD, you can macro this, and spam Shadow Dance as the Death from Above animation executes. If you do it right, Shadow Dance will activate right before the Eviscerate part of Death from Above goes off, and you'll land a huge Eviscerate that's not only buffed by 50% from Death from Above, but also 30% from Dark Shadows, and by 12% from Night Stalker. Now that you're in Shadow Dance, follow up with a standard rotation of Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. Doing this combo right is where the majority of your damage comes from, as you can see from a graph like this. These huge DPS spikes every 30 seconds are from me doing the combo every time Symbols of Death comes up. Even though Shadow Dance technically has a 1-minute cooldown, with Deepening Shadows, its actual cooldown comes out to about 25 to 30 seconds, so you can basically hold it for symbols every time. Of course, if Shadow Dance is about to reach 2 charges, use one before that happens so that you're not wasting anything. For your other cooldowns, use Shadow Blades on pull, and just use it off cooldown afterwards, since it doesn't really interact with anything. For Gormaw's Bite, don't worry about its damage at all. Just use it for energy and combo points, meaning ideally use it at less than 3 combo points and less than 50 energy. A few other notes about your rotation. Your Finality trait buffs every other Eviscerate and Nightblade based on how many combo points were spent on the previous one. Assuming 5 to 6 combo point finishers, the buff amounts to 20 to 24%, which is pretty significant. Let's talk about your opener, because this is where a lot of your damage comes from. To start, use Shadow Blades immediately on the pull, and Shadow Strike. Apply Nightblade. Go into a Shadow Dance, then use Shadow Strike, Symbols and immediately Shadow Strike, and Eviscerate. Use another Shadow Strike, a Backstab to fill your combo points, and at this point go into your combo as mentioned above, which means Vanish, use Death from Above, use Dance right before it lands, and then Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. Afterwards you can Backstab if you have the energy, and Gormaw's Bite if you don't, and then refresh your Nightblade. Here's what the actual opener looks like on a training dummy. Now a brief mention of AoE, since it's easy to learn a single target rotation on a training dummy and then be completely lost when you walk into a dungeon and see more than one mob. Sub Rogue's a little bit weird in that the goal of Sub Rogue AoE is not actually to deal AoE damage, but to funnel a ton of single target damage into your main target, since Shuriken Storm doesn't actually deal that much damage, but it does buff your Eviscerates. So the bread and butter of Sub AoE is essentially to pick a main target that has Nightblade applied to it, then hit Shadow Dance, and then go Shuriken Storm, Eviscerate, Eviscerate. Of course, if DFA is up, use it with Symbols and Dance just like you would on single target. Unfortunately, its long animation makes it hard to fit both halves of DFA into Shadow Dance, so I generally recommend just doing it as before. Spam Shadow Dance while you're in the air to land a huge Eviscerate. With all the buffs plus 50% from Shuriken combo, I regularly see these DFA Eviscerates crit for over 12 million. Here's a sample opener on AoE if you have 2 charges of Shadow Dance. Shadow Blades, then Shuriken Storm, apply Nightblade, use Shadow Dance and Symbols, Shuriken Storm Eviscerate, Shuriken Storm, Vanish into your Death from Above, use Shadow Dance right before it lands, just like in the single target rotation, and then Shuriken Storm Eviscerate, and just continue doing Shuriken Storm Eviscerates as long as there's AoE targets. Keep in mind you'll generate way more Shadow Dances than usual doing this, so don't be afraid to use them. When it comes to gear, your rough stat priority is Agility, then Mastery roughly tied with Verse, then Crit a little bit behind, and then Haste quite a bit behind. For example, here are my current stat weights for my rogue. Of course you should sim your characters to get your own stat weights, but in general, if you prioritize Mast Verse and avoid Haste, you're probably doing okay. Keep in mind that builds without the Legendary shoulders tend to value Crit quite a bit higher, putting it pretty much equal to Mastery and Verse. For Relics, a lot of sub-traits are actually very close together in value. A good rule of thumb is that Energetic Stabbing, Soul Shadows, Gut Ripper, and Weak Point are worth about 10 item levels, and then Precision Strike, Demon's Kiss, Fortune's Bite, and Quiet Knife are worth about 5 item levels, and the dodge traits are of course worth 0. Still, that's not nearly as much of a difference as some other specs, meaning that even a dodge relic that's 15 item levels higher is actually an upgrade, as sad as that may be. For legendaries, since the shoulder and bracer nerfs, there's actually quite a lot of viable legendaries for Subtlety. Shoulder plus Bracer with the tier 24 piece is still the best build by a small margin, but pretty much any combination of shoulders, bracers, hands, insignia, and the Vigor Ring is viable, meaning they're all within about 30k DPS of each other. Builds that use 2 legendaries that don't take up tier slots, for example bracers plus a ring, should try to wear 6 pieces of tier if they can, to get a tier 19 2-piece and a tier 24 piece. Of the remaining legendaries, the Boots and Cinedaria are decent, and Cloak is actually quite good in dungeons and AoE situations. If you can pop a 30 stack Shuriken Storm with Dark Shadow and Symbols of Death active, it's a pretty huge AoE nuke. And everything else, the Faint Pants, Safuz, Pride As, and the Kil'jaeden's Trinket are pretty mediocre, sorry. We've already covered the talent build, which is this build I'm using right here, but you can also play Marked for Death if you use Weapon Master and Shadow Focus. A note on Weapon Master, this talent is actually technically stronger than Master of Subtlety, however the problem is it's actually bugged with DFA and will make your DFA just not work sometimes, which is why we take Master of Subtlety instead with that build. Even Gloomblade can be a viable talent if you're using the Insignia of Ravenhold Legendary or you expect to get a lot of front hits on the boss. The level 60 tier, even though I said your preference earlier, I'd personally recommend Cheat Death to just about everyone. No one's perfect, everyone makes mistakes, and there's no replacement to being able to survive something that should have killed you. On top of that, even when it doesn't proc, the safety and peace of mind you get from knowing it will save you from death lets you play more recklessly, which results in increased DPS. So personally, I love Cheat Death and never play without it, except for the occasional very rare fight where elusiveness is used to mitigate some sort of sustained dot damage, which happened on Cenarius and Tichondrius, but is not the case on any Tomb of Sargeras bosses. No rogue guide would be complete without talking about the fantastic defensive and movement abilities in the rogue toolkit. Using these properly is the key to playing the class to its full potential. It's what separates rogues from other melee DPS and consistently makes good rogues desired in high level PvE, even during patches when their DPS numbers aren't the best. Cloak of Shadows is a fantastically strong CD that removes all magic debuffs on you and makes you immune to magic damage for 5 seconds. Its low cooldown of 1.5 minutes makes it one of the strongest defensive cooldowns of any class in the game, and often makes it a breeze to deal with mechanics that would otherwise be deadly, or at the very least annoying. Here's some examples of cloak usage in Tomb of Sargeras. Pause the video if you want to read all of them. Feint is also a fantastic ability, though it's something of a weird one. For 35 energy, you reduce area damage taken for 5 seconds by 50%. Area damage generally includes physical and magic damage that hits a specific area, or is raid-wide, or damage that originates from some sort of pool on the ground. So pretty much the only thing that is not reduced is damage from an actual dot on you, single target abilities targeting only you, and melee attacks. However, sometimes abilities that shouldn't be affected just are for whatever reason. For example, the dot that you get from standing in the Well of Souls on Gul'dan was reduced by Feint. Don't ask me why. In any case, since Feint costs energy, you're not going to be spamming it, but it's still good to use it for mitigating some hard-hitting AoEs, or just if you find yourself out of position and need to run through some fire. Remember, virtually all damage that happens in raids is area damage, and being able to have it with no cooldown is extremely strong. Learn to love Feint, it'll keep you alive all the time. Evasion is an ability with limited use in dungeons and raids, but if your tank dies, or just if you have aggro on something, you can hit this to dodge all melee attacks for 10 seconds. Finally, there's Crimson Vial, which is a minor self-heal on a 30-second cooldown. This is decent if you're taking sustained damage, but often it'll just end up overhealing as a healer immediately tops you off to full. Still, sometimes this little emergency heal might just be enough to save your life. Being a rogue, you also have some really good mobility, in fact, more than either of the other two specs have. Sprint is a pretty standard movement speed increase on a 50-second cooldown. Shadow Step is a fantastic ability that instantly teleports you behind the targeted enemy or ally. With 2 charges, it's up pretty much any time you need it, making this one of the best movement abilities in the game. I only put this section into this guide because if I don't, I know I'll get an inevitable barrage of questions about my macros, but the reality is I don't actually use a whole lot of macros because I don't feel that I need them. If you have Spectre of Betrayal, you can macro into Shadow Dance like this, and you'll probably be fine about 95% of the time. There's also one useful macro that can be used to abuse a bug called Unbreakable Vanish. Basically, if you vanish and use an ability almost instantly, that ability won't break Vanish, so a macro like this can effectively be used to extend your Vanish, and by extension your 100% crit buff from your shoulders, by 1 GCD. This also lets 2 abilities be buffed by Night Stalker instead of 1. So it's a slightly advanced technique, but if possible, you can hit this macro at 3 combo points and then go into your DFA combo. Finally, a note on UI. Everything that you see on my screen here is built in an add-on called Weak Auras 2. The cool thing about Weak Auras is that you can export a group of auras to a text string that can be used by someone else to import them, and that's exactly what I've done. I put these strings in a paste bin, and you can find the link to this paste bin in the video description. If you open the add-on, click Import, and then paste in those text strings, you'll be able to import this exact setup that I have here, which tracks energy, combo points, all your important cooldowns and buffs, as well as a couple of things over here in progress bar form. The 3 groups you'll want to import are called Rogue, Rogue 6 combo points, and sub progress bars. Try it out, and I think you'll find having all the information you need in the center of your screen will significantly improve your play. That's it for my Sub Rogue guide. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully it's shown you that Sub Rogue isn't really that scary of a spec after all. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the comments. I always try and answer everyone. And if you like this video, leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Making these videos is a lot of work, and I always appreciate when I see that people have enjoyed them. Thanks for watching.